It was 5:02 a.m. when someone started banging on my door like the building was on fire. Not knocking, not ringing the bell. Banging. Hard. Controlled. Desperate. I sat up in bed instantly, my heart pounding as if I had been dragged out of a nightmare, though I couldn't even remember what I had dreamed. The apartment was dark, with only the faint light of a street lamp filtering through the curtains. I froze for a second, listening closely. The banging repeated. 3 sharp blows. A pause. 3 more. "Bianca," a muffled voice called through the door. "Open up. It's urgent." I recognized the voice almost immediately. My neighbor. The one who usually didn't even bother to say good morning. This was already bizarre. I threw a hoodie over my t-shirt and walked barefoot to the door, trying not to make a sound. A dozen scenarios flashed through my mind in an instant. A fire, a burglary, someone dying, the police. But his voice didn't sound panicked. It sounded tense, controlled. I opened the door. He stood there in a gray jacket, looking as if he hadn't slept in days. His eyes darted around, his face tight with anxiety. The first thing he did was look over his shoulder, as if terrified someone would see us. "You need to stay home from work today," he said without greeting me. I blinked. "What?" "Don't go. Just don't. Call in sick, take a personal day, make up whatever you have to." I stared at him, trying to figure out if this was some twisted joke. "Are you serious right now?" "Absolutely." He took a step closer and lowered his voice. "By noon, you'll understand why." I didn't like the sound of that at all. "Explain it to me properly," I said, crossing my arms. "What is going on?" He shook his head. "I can't. Not yet." "Then why on earth do you think I'm just going to sit here and listen to you?" He looked me dead in the eye, for the first time in all the years we had lived across the hall from each other. "Because if you go to the office today, you will walk straight into a trap, and you won't be able to undo it." Silence hung between us, thick, unpleasant. "That sounds like a threat," I said coldly. "It's not a threat," he replied quickly. "It's a warning. Stay by your computer." I opened my mouth to demand more answers, but he was already stepping back into the shadows of the hallway. "Just stay home, Bianca. Please." And then he was gone. Just like that. No explanations, no details. Leaving me standing barefoot in the doorway at 5 in the morning with a gut-wrenching feeling that something was terribly fundamentally wrong. I didn't go back to bed. Sleep was entirely out of the question. I brewed a cup of coffee, though I couldn't even remember turning on the machine. My hands moved on autopilot while my mind raced in circles around a single phrase. "By noon, you'll understand." What did that mean? I unlocked my phone. 6 missed calls from my mother. I rolled my eyes. Of course, perfect timing. I didn't even bother calling back. I already knew exactly what I would hear. She never called just to chat, only when she needed something. It had always been that way. I was the good daughter as long as I was paying, as long as I was helping, as long as I was fixing their endless financial disasters. But the moment I drew a boundary, the moment I said no, I became ungrateful. I put the phone down, but it immediately vibrated again. This time, a text message. "Where are you? Why aren't you answering? We urgently need money." I let out a mirthless laugh. Of course. Money. It was always about money. Never a "how are you?" Never "are you doing okay?" Straight to the point. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop. If my neighbor wanted me to stay by my computer, I needed to check my digital footprint. I logged into my banking portals, my corporate accounts, my tax registry. For the next 2 hours, I dug through my own life, and the knot in my stomach tightened. There were corporate registries I had never heard of, tied to my name. Bank accounts opened using my credentials. Large, automated wire transfers moving through them. By 8 a.m., my phone was practically exploding. My mother, my father, my sister, even my brother, who usually didn't remember I existed for weeks at a time. I ignored them all. But inside, the pressure was mounting. Something massive was happening. And somehow my family had placed me right at the epicenter of it. At 11:47 a.m., I caught myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at my phone screen for 10 minutes without blinking. Nothing new was happening. No news alerts. No further explanations. Just a suffocating sense that a net was closing in around me, and I was only now seeing the strings. 12 p.m. Noon had passed. I let out a long breath. "Great," I muttered to myself. A very useful warning. I was just about to write my neighbor off as a paranoid freak when I heard the sound, faint at first, then growing louder. Sirens, multiple vehicles. I walked over to the window and looked down. My breath caught in my throat. Police cars were pulling up to my building. Not just one, 3 cruisers, and another unmarked SUV was turning the corner. It took me a moment to realize what truly terrified me. It wasn't just their presence, it was where they were looking. They were looking up at my entrance, at my floor, at my windows, and in that exact moment my phone vibrated again. A new text from my mother. I opened it, and for the first time in years a cold dread washed over my skin. "What have you done?" I read my mother's text 3 times, as if repetition would make it make sense. But the words remained unchanged. They didn't get softer or more logical. They only dug deeper into my mind, leaving behind a sick, familiar taste. The feeling of being preemptively blamed for something I knew nothing about. That was the most recognizable sensation of all. Not the fear of the police outside, but this old, deeply ingrained childhood trauma. No matter what went wrong, it would always be my fault. The phone rang again. This time I answered. "What have I done?" I asked immediately, without a greeting, watching the officers downstairs speak to the building manager. "You're seriously asking me that?" My mother's voice was on the verge of a screech, but beneath the anger, I detected something else. Genuine panic. "Bianca, people already called us. Official people. I don't even know who they are. They are asking horrific questions about you." I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my voice to remain steady. "What kind of questions?" "About money," she practically hissed. "About offshore accounts, wire transfers, dummy corporations. What kind of hell have you dragged us into?" I closed my eyes for a brief second. There it was. Finally, the truth. "Dragged us into?" I repeated softly. "Don't you start with your tone right now," she snapped, her voice suddenly turning cold and calculating. "You were always secretive, always hiding things, but this is too much. If you think your father and I are going to take the fall for your legal messes." I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Take the fall for my messes?" I interrupted her. "Are you serious right now?" A heavy silence fell over the line. It was that specific, telling pause that happens when a manipulator realizes the conversation is veering off the script they had prepared. "Bianca, now is not the time for your dramatics," she began, her tone shifting into something more controlled, trying to regain high ground. "We need to fix this situation. If you did something illegal, you need to tell us right now so we can..." "So you can what?" I walked closer to the window, watching 2 officers enter the building lobby. "So you can figure out how to blame me faster?" She went quiet, and in that silence, everything became clear. All the years of emotional neglect, all the manipulative phone calls, all the times they claimed they had nothing to do with my struggles. "We are your family," she finally said, though the conviction was entirely gone from her voice. "Really?" I replied softly. "Then why do you only remember I'm family when your fraudulent safety net fails?" There was no answer, only her heavy, ragged breathing on the other end. "Bianca," she started again, her tone shifting entirely now, softer, cautious, desperate. "If this is about the corporate accounts, you know we just wanted to secure our future. We thought you wouldn't notice, we thought you'd be protected." I slowly pulled the phone away from my ear. To help. Of course. That was always their euphemism. To help meant to take. To support meant to demand more. Family meant unlimited, unquestioned access to my identity and my life. I brought the phone back to my mouth. "Don't leave your house today," I said calmly. "What? What do you mean?" I looked down at the empty street where the police cars were parked. "By noon, you'll understand," I said, echoing the neighbor's words, and I hung up. The apartment became profoundly quiet. So quiet that every sound from the hallway seemed amplified. The heavy thud of the elevator door, footsteps, the static crackle of a police radio, short, crisp commands. I stood in the middle of my living room, motionless, and felt something inside me align. The chaotic noise that had dictated my life for years was suddenly gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity, because this disaster hadn't happened all of a sudden. It was a long time coming. Then came the knock. This time, it was an official, measured rap on the wood, entirely different from the desperate banging at 5 in the morning. I didn't rush to answer it. I let them knock a second time, and a third. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel obligated to react instantly to external pressure. I didn't feel the need to apologize, to explain myself, or to panic. I knew why they were here. And more importantly, I knew I had the digital evidence sitting right on my laptop to prove exactly who had forged my signature. When I finally opened the door, 2 detectives stood on the threshold. A man and a woman, both in plain clothes but carrying the unmistakable authority of federal law enforcement. "Bianca Overton?" the man asked. "Yes. We need to ask you some questions regarding a financial fraud investigation." I nodded and stepped aside, allowing them into the apartment. I watched as their eyes scanned the room, taking in the details, looking for signs of guilt. For them, this was a crime scene in the making. For me, it was just the place where I was finally going to take my life back. "Is this going to take long?" I asked calmly. The woman looked at me, a flicker of surprise crossing her face at my composure. "That depends entirely on your cooperation, Miss Overton." I offered a small, tired smile. "Then I assure you it won't take long at all." They sat at the dining table and opened a folder. I chose to remain standing. It wasn't accidental. I refused to play the role of a cornered suspect. "Are you familiar with this shell corporation?" the male detective asked, sliding a printout across the table. I didn't even need to look closely. I recognized the name from my morning search. "Yes," I said. "But those aren't my signatures and those aren't my bank accounts. I believe you'll find the IP addresses used to open them trace back to my parents' estate." The detectives exchanged a quick, sharp look. The man leaned forward. "Miss Overton, we have a warrant for your arrest based on the corporate filings. However, your neighbor, Mr. Vance, who works as a forensic consultant for our fraud unit, submitted an independent brief to our office at 9 a.m. this morning. He claimed you were an unwitting victim of identity theft." My mind flashed back to 5 a.m. If I had gone to work, I would have been arrested at my desk, my electronics seized, unable to access the local backup drives that contained the logs proving my innocence. He hadn't been threatening me. He had been buying me time. He was right, I said, walking over to my laptop. "I have the administrative logs right here. My father has been using my old security tokens for 18 months. Just as I turned the screen toward them, the female detective's phone buzzed. She answered it, listened for a moment, and her expression hardened. "Copy that. Secure the perimeter there," she said before hanging up. She looked up at me. "Miss Overton, our field team just executed a secondary warrant at your parents' residence. Your father and sister have just been taken into custody attempting to liquidate the remaining assets." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. A verdict that no one could appeal, because it was mathematically, undeniably true. I expected to feel a wave of grief. I expected tears or anger or betrayal. But as I looked at the detectives, all I felt was an overwhelming sense of relief. The burden of carrying their secrets, of fixing their lives, of being their shield. It was over. After 2 hours of signing formal statements and handing over my hard drives, the detectives finally left. The apartment felt incredibly large now, empty, but in a clean, restorative way. I walked out into the hallway. My neighbor was standing by his door, a mug of coffee in his hand, looking exhausted but entirely calm. "You stayed home," he noted quietly. "I did," I replied. "Thank you. If I had gone to the office, they would have processed you before you could dig up the server logs," he finished for me, offering a faint, understanding smile. "I've been tracking that specific fraud ring for 3 months. When your name popped up on the indictment list last night, I knew your family had set you up to take the fall. I couldn't let that happen." "An official tip would have been less terrifying than a 5 a.m. wake-up call," I noted, a small smirk playing on my lips. "Bureaucracy takes time," he shrugged. "A fist on a door is instantaneous." I smiled genuinely for the first time all day. "Thank you, Mr. Vance." "Call me Leo," he said, turning back into his apartment. When I closed my door and walked back to the window, the street below was completely normal. The police cars were gone. The city noise continued, indifferent to the fact that inside this apartment, an entire life built on the illusion of family had just collapsed. My phone vibrated one last time in my pocket. A final text from my mother, sent right before her phone was likely confiscated. "Please, Bianca, we didn't know the federal units were involved. You have to help us." I stared at the glowing screen for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, I deleted the message. I blocked the number. And for the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel regret. I just felt the quiet. Real, unburdened quiet. Sometimes people think family is something that stays with you no matter what. But sometimes family is the thing you have to cut away, just so you can finally start to live. The scariest moment isn't when they betray you. It's the moment you realize they never actually loved you enough to stop.